Hi, I'm Cailey, a librarian here at Mentor Public Library.
And I'm Meg, also a librarian, and welcome to this week's edition of All Booked Up with Cailey and Meg, where each time we give you different book recommendations on a specific theme. Today, Cailey and I are going to be looking at friendship. So these are fiction books that look at the good, the bad, and the ugly of friendship.
And I think that this is one that we can all relate to because, whether we have had a friend for years that's been super close to us or one that we've just found, I think we all kind of can fit in with these stories. And all of the books that we're going to talk about today are available for you with your library card for free, both in the library as well as online through Libby and Hoopla. Okay, Meg, what is your first friendship title?
My first friendship title is called Fellowship Point by Alice Elliott Dark. And this one has come out semi-recently within the last year. And it's about two friends who've grown up together and their lives have taken different paths. So our first person is celebrated children's book author Agnes Lee. And she's determined to secure her legacy. She's had a very successful career, but now she knows she's about to write her final volume of her pseudonymously, if I said that correctly, written Franklin Square novels. And also, she has another goal in mind connected to her hometown, which is to permanently protect the peninsula of Majestic Coast in Maine, known as Fellowship Point. So she kind of has these two goals in mind at the same time. However, there's a little road bump in the way. To preserve this piece of land in Maine connected to her hometown, there's a generations old partnership that is kind of keeping the land from being in the public's ownership. So to get that, she kind of has to deal with her best friend growing up, Polly Wister. And Polly has led a different kind of life than Agnes after their childhood. She's a well-off married woman with children, and she's kind of defined by her devotion to her husband. And she's also a philosophy professor, it says here, with an inflated sense of stature. So she kind of has a little different set of goals that she's achieved in her life from Agnes. But this all comes to a head when Agnes tries to convince Polly, who's one of the shareholders, to dissolve this dispute for the land in Maine. And I just find it's really interesting because they share, like when they reunite in the story, they have this immediate connection from all their childhood memories. So there's still that instant closeness, but their lives have taken such different paths. And honestly, they have such different values that it's interesting to see how those things can coexist. Deep friendship with a deep set of different values in life. So I find that really interesting. It also explores friendship in the concept of aging, as you're getting older, how it evolves and your friendships evolve and change over time. So it's a really a sweet contemplation on friendship, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, and I like too that that's almost like an estranged friendship.
Yes.
They kind of come back to one another, and how that is probably there's a lot of tension, it sounds like, between them, as well as, that shared memory.
Yeah.
That sounds interesting.
What about you?
My first one is called The Supremes at Earl's All You Can Eat by Edward Kelsey Moore. And this one, like you said, kind of similar to yours, it explores sort of how friendships change and grow throughout the years. So Odette, Clarice, and Barbara Jean have been best friends for decades. And as teenagers in the 1960s, they were nicknamed the Supremes. And every Sunday, they go to lunch at Earl's All You Can Eat after church. Despite their super long shared histories together, there are some secrets between these close friends. Odette's been sick and is not really letting her friends in on the extent of that. Clarice's husband has been running around on her. And Barbara Jean has never really gotten over her first love, who is suddenly somehow back in the picture. And this book is told from each woman's perspective between the 1960s as well as the early 2000s. So you really get to see how these women grew and changed. And, it starts in the 1960s, which is really when they were kind of coming of age as teenagers and young adults, and the way their paths separated and came back together again. It also gives you that perspective from the 2000s, where it sort of jumps back in time here and there to like some of those time periods that are not quite covered, and the different loves and losses that they've experienced over the years. It takes place in Plainview, Indiana, which is a fictional town that really has a lot of that like Midwestern / Southern values. It seems to have the best of both. And it can be an incredibly wholesome town, very like welcoming, but at the same time, it has also been a source of hurt for all of the women at different times. Growing up as African-American women in the 1950s and 60s, they were definitely affected by racist attitudes, and that hit close to home for them and affected them in different ways, but had a profound effect overall on where they are in life. And it has some really interesting relationships between the three women, because when you think of like best friend, you might think of like two people. But these three women have been so tight over the years, and at different times, two of them might be closer than others. And at other times, they have to lean on one another, or, two friends have to prop up a third when something terrible happens. And simply put, like, I loved this book. This book came out a good 10 years ago, which was surprising to me when I looked up the publication date, because it really has stuck with me through this time. And I was excited to find out that this is becoming a movie with a really good looking cast. And I can't wait to see how they bring it to life and, probably update it just a touch depending on their time periods, since they're making it now 10 years after it was originally written. But it really has a great demonstration of powerful friendships and the changes they go through the years and everything.
Love it. I was just thinking while you were describing it, how in the scenes that take place in the 60s, I would just be having a continuous Motown soundtrack going on in my head the whole time. I just love that era, and I just like, it makes me nostalgic, even though, I wasn't around in the 60s
sure.
or anything. But so I love that, and the different eras, like you said, to see how friendships evolve over the years. That sounds like a great one. I'm also looking forward to the adaptation. Sounds interesting. Yeah. So my next friendship novel also has three friends in the center of it. And this one is about friendships with a darker twist to it. It's called The Ballerinas by Rachel Kapelke-Dale. Yes. And yes, right. I love ballet, but this is more like Black Swan.
That's what I was thinking.
Right, exactly. So it's an edgier friendship book. It's about three friends, Delphine, Margot, and Lindsay, and they're training to be in the Paris Opera Ballet. Very vigorous, very renowned, opera house with a great ballet program. But yeah, it's cutthroat to get, accepted into that program, even to try. That doesn't even guarantee you're going to be able to perform or be one of the featured players. So these three girls as teenagers are super dedicated, but they're super close as well. As they go through the program, different opportunities arise for them to progress in their career, some a little sketchier than others. And it's about how those choices to get ahead impact their friendship. And this book also transports between two different times. So it focuses on their time in Paris as teenagers, and then it alternates with 20 years later in their mid-30s, kind of where their careers have progressed, especially with Delphine, who has gone on to become a choreographer. She's actually you find out she's moved around the world, in her career, and she decides to come back to Paris 20 years later and kind of see if their friendships can be repaired. So this is a great book choice if you like those behind the curtain stories, that take you behind what it takes to get ahead in professions and how that affects your most important relationships and the good and bad choices that can be made in that world. So super fascinating read, and I highly recommend it.
That one sounds very interesting to me too, because I like the aspect that it's not just their friendship is based on this friendship kind of thing or similar likes, but also the environment they're in, which is so stressful. So they kind of have to lean on one another, but how it's also quite competitive. So you can't be exactly yourself. Wow. That one sounds interesting. My next one is called Riverbend Reunion by Carolyn Brown. And this one is more like small townish, I guess, but also kind of the romancy, friendship, coming back home type book. Jessica, Risa, Mary Nell, and Haley were the best of friends in high school, cheerleaders, and did everything together, but scattered shortly after high school, as happens. 20 years later, they find themselves all back in their hometown of Riverbend, Texas. And even though they haven't seen one another in years, once they get together, it's like no time has passed at all. And they are immediately back to being the best of friends and supportive and with one another. So the whole start of this is that Jessica has returned to town after inheriting property from an uncle. When she arrives, she's surprised to find out that she's now the owner of an unusual property that she doesn't quite know what to do with, and sort of turns to her friends to figure out how she should proceed. And this stems from her interest in starting a business and maybe staying in town, and how she can do something like that. And together with her old friends and perhaps a new love interest, she begins to let these things sort of fall into place. She's been very out of sorts because she's been in Afghanistan serving in the military. And so she's not really had a place to call home for a long time. So coming back to Riverbend really makes her feel like she needs to establish a home base somewhere that she can feel settled. And that is where she kind of connects with this man who is older than her, but also has a lot of similar experiences and also grew up in Riverbend. And with his help too, kind of develops this plan, not necessarily just for the property, but for her life. And I like this one because it also has a lot of complicated outside relationships with family. There's some marital issues that are occurring among the group. There's also like just some family things with like the mother-daughter where they don't get along. And this book really shows that vibe of a family can be made, not necessarily just who you were born into, but these friends have been her chosen family and have really been her rock through a lot of this stuff, and how they're each other's rock through the various ups and downs of life. One of them's gone through a divorce. One of them has twin kids that they're trying to figure out how to raise, just kind of figuring out how to support one another when you don't necessarily have a strong family backbone.
Oh, I love it. That just seems so sweet and also cozy. Just gives me a cozy vibe connected to hometown, your hometown. And I love it, Cailey. Adorable. And I noticed I think all four of our books today were like friendship related to time as well, like the impact of time. Like over
That's
the
true.
years,
Get that.
So, that's I don't know. I find that fascinating. You can have a great friendship for a little period of time, but over the long haul, that's great. Well, friend, we did it. Well, thank you all. You're also our friends, our listeners. Thank you for joining us for this edition of All Booked Up in Cailey and Meg. We hope you found some great reads that you'll hopefully try out.
Yes. And we'll see you next time. Happy reading.